Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Podblog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel Training and Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Our guest today is Court Carmody. I'll just give a brief background on how I found Court. I was looking for some resources for another podcast that I'm co-host of, The Jan Broberg Show, and ran across Court's video about an experience that she had with sex assault. And that being the whole purpose of the Sex Assault Survivor Story platform here, I reached out to her and asked her if she'd be willing to come on the podcast and talk to us a little bit about her experience and give us some of her insights and experiences and feelings and words of wisdom for not only other victims, but also the impact that sex assault and rape has not only on the victim, but the people that are in their lives. So, Court, welcome. And I'm just going to kind of turn it over to you and have you tell our audience a little bit about you.
Yeah. So, hi, my name is Court. It's so hard for me to describe what you said. You wanted me to talk about what I'm doing now. I don't really know what I'm doing now. There was a time when I was an influencer and I had a platform on Instagram, YouTube. I guess that was mostly at other places too, where I talked about sexual assault, mental health, abuse, things of that nature, body positivity. I've taken a bit of a break since COVID. I've been looking to get back into it. I'm really excited to be doing this podcast with you because I think that's a great stepping stone to kind of push me. I've been really nervous about having to put myself out there again. It takes a lot of energy sometimes. But yeah, basically what I'm doing right now is I'm working on new scripts, new topics. I actually just started yesterday. My birthday is on Monday. So for the week.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you. But for the week leading up to my birthday, I've been drafting some Instagram posts, positive messages and things like that. Things I've learned in my short 29 years as a sort of, I don't know, testing the waters, I guess, dipping my toes back into getting onto social media again. It's been a little nice for it to be quiet, but I miss all the outreach and stuff that I used to do. So I'm really excited to get back into it.
Yeah, great. I'm glad you are. And I'm glad we kind of connected. It's really neat. For my audience, I just really had the opportunity to reach out to her and talk via texting and stuff. But today we had a really short little pre-interview conversation. And what Court has to offer, I think, is amazing and very helpful for this type of audience. And if you could tell us a little bit about your influencer experience, but also how that YouTube video came to be. I mean, you had a lot of courage telling the world that you had been a victim of sexual assault. And for that, I commend you. But tell me what led up to that, how you got to the position and point where you could actually talk about that.
I'd say it all started about 10 years ago. I was very hush-hush about the first experience that I had was when I was 14. I had a very abusive boyfriend, and I didn't tell anybody for a really long time. When I finally did tell people, a lot of people didn't believe me or it got brushed off, things that lots of victims experience. And I wasn't really open talking about it for several years after that. But then in 2012, I think I was 18. I used to post. I had this 365-day project where, because I'm a photographer, and I would post a picture every single day, and sometimes I'd tell a little story. And they were starting to focus on like mental health and stuff. So I decided I wanted to take that a little bit further, and I made a video. And it was one of those videos that everyone was doing back then, where you hold up the signs and you tell a little story about yourself. And my story was about my assault. And I had invited people. I just made a kind of a public Facebook event, I think, or something, and invited people to come to my studio and do a photo shoot where we can all tell our stories. I called it Women with Confidence. A couple of my friends got involved and were helping me out with it, and it was a lot of fun. I remember I went to Kroger and I bought a dozen cupcakes, and I was very nervous that I bought too many cupcakes. And I think around 75 people ended up coming, which was really awesome, very unexpected. I didn't sleep a lot that weekend, I remember.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, the video ended up going like a little bit viral, and a lot of people, I didn't know almost any of the people that came. A few of them I did know, which was also kind of crazy because they were like maybe mild acquaintances that I had in high school or something. Like I didn't really know them.
Right.
So it was really cool that, you know, they still came. Like it wasn't awkward. It was really awesome. We ended up doing some interviews and stuff with some of the people and posting those on YouTube too. So that was really cool. And then that just kind of became an outreach thing that I did for a long time, just inspiring people to tell their stories. And um, people would send in photos and stuff too, and we would share them, and just trying to, one, create a community of people who understand. It wasn't all sexual assault either. It was lots of different things. Some of them were as simple, wouldn't say simple, but as saying like, oh, I was bullied or something. And then some of them were all, you know, I was assaulted or I was abused. There was a whole array of different things. And fast forward a few years later, that had kind of fallen off. It just kind of lost traction. You know, the internet moves on.
Yeah.
And by I'd say 2017, I think 16, 17. It was 17. I was a cosplayer, and I was starting to get a little bit of a following on there, on Instagram through my cosplays. And I cosplayed a lot of like cartoon characters and stuff. So a lot of my following was pretty young. And once I realized that I was getting this following of mostly young teenagers, I realized that I wanted to do something with it. I wanted to have something important to say. I was given this voice that I didn't really ask for, but you know, I'm a big Spider-Man fan, and with great power comes great responsibility. So once I got this voice, I really want to do something with it. So I just thought about what is something that I would have wanted, what's something I would have looked up to as a teenager. And I remember how isolated that I felt, suffering from depression, suffering from abuse, anxiety, my, you know, body dysmorphia, things like that, things that pretty much every teenager, or at least a lot of teenagers, go through, but nobody ever gets to talk about. So you feel so alone, you don't think anybody else understands. And I remember so badly wishing that there was somebody, even just a celebrity or someone online or something, that I could relate to. And so I decided I wanted to be that. So I started being very open and vocal, talking about my experience. I had another experience in 2016, which is the one that the video you saw is based on, with another abusive boyfriend. And so I just started talking about that. It started with just a few Instagram posts, turned into doing some live streams, turned into having an advice column where people would write me anonymously and I would respond. And that eventually turned into the YouTube channel, because the YouTube channel was essentially me making videos about what people were writing into on the advice column. And I did that for a couple of years. And then, like I said, I, you know, had to focus on my mental health, had to adjust my own gas mask before helping others for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
took a break from that. In that time, I got married, and I have a son now. I have a 6-year-old stepson.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so once they came into the picture, it was even more of a reason for me to step back a bit. Being an influencer is a weird world that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. And in light of protecting my son and our privacy and stuff, I'm now way more selective about what I post and stuff. But I spent a while thinking about how I wanted to get back into it, the things I would say, how I would do it to make sure I keep my private life private, but am still able to talk very openly, because I like being very open. I like being really honest and talking very deeply about things. I'm very comfortable with it. And I know a lot of people aren't comfortable talking the way that I do, which is fine, but it's just more of a reason for that I feel that I, you know, have that responsibility to use my voice.
Yeah. Well, I think what you've done and what you're kind of anticipating doing is commendable. And I appreciate it, just for no other reason than for you to be willing to come on to this podcast and talk about your experience. Can we go there for a minute? And
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to let you decide where you would like to start, but if I could, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what you're able to tell us about being sexually assaulted?
Yeah. Like I said, I'm really comfortable talking about things. Sometimes I'm just not sure what to bring up. So if you have specific questions, feel free to ask them. I'm better at responding than just thinking of things. But so I would say it goes back. My first real, I'd say, physical experience was when I was 14. It was on my 15th birthday. Um, I met the guy when I was 14. It was a very quick, like a quick build to a very abusive relationship. He was 2 years older than me, so he was 16, going on 17 at the time. And I just remember I was very young. I'd never dated before other than a cute little pass notes to each other in class type of boyfriend or something.
Mm-hmm.
So when something serious happened and I was so young, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. And very quickly it got extremely controlling to the point that I wasn't allowed to go places with my family sometimes at risk of getting in trouble. And I grew up very religious. I'm not anymore, but at the time I was, and I was very set on saving myself for marriage. And he knew that. Everybody knew that. I was very outspoken about that. And he was not. He wanted to take things further. And I was comfortable with little things sometimes, but I would always stop. And uh, then one night, this would have been 3-ish months into dating him, I was at his house. And how detailed do you want me to get?
I want you to be as detailed as you are comfortable with. I think what's important is that people understand how these things kind of evolve and happen, and then what the feelings were in terms of what was going through your mind emotionally and physically while it was happening. And then we'll talk a little bit about the aftermath of the trauma.
The details that I remember are I remember exactly what I was wearing. I remember the exact episode of SpongeBob that was playing on TV, and I remember exactly what the room smelled like. I remember it all vividly. And I remember I was laying on my side and we were all cuddled up, spooning, watching SpongeBob, and he's getting handsy, feeling around, and I'm like, nope, we're moving on. And then at some point, he pulls my pants down and he holds my arms in front of me and he says, I just want to know what it feels like. And he figured out what it felt like.
What were your thoughts when that happened? What were you thinking?
I don't think I thought much of anything at the moment. I'm a freezer in the like fight, flight, or freeze. I'm definitely a freezer. Uh, I just remember not fighting too much, not saying anything. Like once I realized that I was kind of powerless and this is going to happen, I think I just focused on the TV, focused on, I think that's why I can remember the exact scene. It was the one where Squidward was blowing bubbles and yelling into the bubbles. And
Wow.
I can, yeah, I think I just kind of focused like that. And I just remember thinking, I first off, not really understanding what was going on because I knew what sex was kind of in a very, like I said, I was raised very religious. My dad's a Southern Baptist pastor. I was very sheltered and I was given a sex talk, but I didn't really get it. And I actually did not know what my anatomy was like. I did not know until this point that I had a vagina. When I was a kid and I asked my parents where babies come from, they said a hole. I didn't know that was there.
Yeah.
So that was an extra traumatizing thing that I didn't quite unpack until later in life that like, I probably should have known what my body parts were. But that's kind of a separate issue. But yeah, I don't think I fully understood what was happening until it was happening. And then I was like, oh shit, this is what they were talking about. This was that thing I wasn't supposed to do. Like it makes sense now. And I think that was about it. I like I said, I just kind of froze up. I don't think I had too many thoughts other than like, ugh.
Yeah. So I do a lot of training on trauma, and what victim reactions are to sexual assault. And I can assure you, just right off the bat, that being a, as you put it, quote unquote, freezer is the go-to of our brain, our fear section of our brain, and our emotional response and cognitive response is to freeze. It's a survival tactic. And it helps us to survive, to stay alive, but also helps us in the sense that it hopefully prevents further harm. So first of all, yeah, that's very common.
Yeah.
And then it's interesting too.
It bothers me when, people would say like, oh, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you run away? And I'm like, I don't know. My brain didn't do that.
Yeah.
It just.
And that's what I try and train everybody that I talk to in my trainings, is that when law enforcement or victim advocates or even loved ones and friends ask, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? That's very victim blaming. It's very, it's letting other people know that you don't know a whole lot about the neuroscience of trauma and what's going on in the brain. And that's why I do what I do, is try and educate people, not only the audience that I just mentioned, but the whole purpose of this podcast isn't to give victims a platform to tell their stories, but also to give victims and survivors some education on why they felt what they felt and why they may still feel what they're feeling. And that's the whole purpose of SAS. And what we're doing here is to let other people know, hey, what you went through is very common as is what Court went through. And so I'm appreciative that you've brought up some things. You also mentioned that your mind just kind of focused on the SpongeBob episode and that you can remember so much detail. That is so textbook in the neuroscience of what the brain remembers and why it remembers that. And what you did was went into a paratraumatic, or as the trauma was happening, dissociation. So you went into a dissociative state, and rather than thinking about the trauma that you were experiencing, you went into a SpongeBob episode. And that was kind of.
I didn't watch SpongeBob for a long time after that.
Which makes sense, which makes a whole lot of sense in terms of trauma response. So I think other victims and survivors need to hear what you just said, because that is so common. And I'll, at some point in this podcast, go a lot deeper into an explanation for what the brain is doing and why it does that. But that is very common, and you, nothing to be ashamed of or upset about. It's something to realize that that's a function of the brain that helps us survive and get through a traumatic and fearful situation.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about whether or not you felt fear at the time?
I didn't feel fear for the reasons I think a lot of people might think. Like I said, in the moment, I don't think I was thinking much of anything other than like, oh shit. But I do remember afterwards, he lived right around the corner from me, a block away. And so we would walk to each other's houses. And I remember him walking me back home afterward. As soon as it was done, it was like, all right, time to go. So that also sucked. And I was still kind of just processing. And I remember walking back and thinking, oh, I have to get married now, because I was always raised that if you have sex, you have to get married. And at least like in the way that the Bible was taught to me, that was something that was very heavily pushed. Is, Old Testament says over and over that like if a woman is raped, that he has to marry her. And that's what I thought. And I was terrified to tell anyone, one, because I thought they wouldn't believe me, or because maybe I didn't fight enough, thoughts like that. And two, because I was terrified that they were going to make me get married.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that was my main fear at the time. I was scared to say anything to him because I thought he'd be mad at me. Like I said, this was like a very like quickly abusive relationship, but it was at the same time kind of a slow burn. They start off as little things that don't seem controlling, and then they get worse and worse. They test the waters, and then as soon as they kind of get their claws in you, you can't get out. And so that's kind of where I was with him. And I was also so young. I just didn't know. I didn't know what to do. And so I didn't know if I could tell him how I felt. I didn't know if it was even wrong. I really didn't know what was going on. So I think if anything, my fear was just A, fear of how people were going to react. Do I tell anyone? And B, like fear of the unknown. Like I just had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. And you mentioned some of those fears of not telling because A, you didn't think anybody would believe you, and B, if they did believe you, the blame would be on you.
Yeah.
Two of the number one reasons why victims don't talk about their sex assault, and then that first one is super important. Tell me more about your experience of feeling like you wouldn't be believed and what your response was as a result of that to having just been raped.
Yeah. I continued dating him for several months. I think we in total we were together for about a year. Mainly because I was so scared to tell anybody. And like I said, in my head, I thought I got to stay with him because I've had sex now. I'm not a virgin anymore. So I have to stay with him. And I think he knew that, which gave him even more control over me. But at the same time, I wanted to reach out and ask for help, but I was just so scared. I think partially because of the way that I was raised and partially just society. You hear things, people say things. I remember one time hearing someone say, they weren't talking about me, they were talking about someone else, but um, he said that he doesn't believe in rape because every house has a frying pan, which doesn't even make sense. First of all, I get what he meant, like you could hit him with a frying pan or something, but like I wasn't in the kitchen. What? Like dumbest thing you could say. But people say things like that all the time. They don't know who they're talking to. They don't know what people around them have been through. People just say stuff like that all the time.
Yeah.
And hearing little things like that, I just thought no one's gonna believe me. And on the offhand that someone does believe me, they're gonna, it's not that big of a deal. And I think there was a time when I had to convince myself that something had actually happened to me. I don't think I knew that I was raped until probably months later. Um, that would have that was in November. So I remember having a conversation with my youth pastor's wife in the summertime. And I think that was when I finally realized that something bad had happened, was talking to her and getting her reaction. And I was like, oh my God. And that's not the only time that's happened. That was just the first one. Like it's happened a bunch of times since, but it became so normal to me that it was like a chore. It was just something I had to do.
There's another huge misconception out there that if you've been sexually assaulted once, you now know what to do to prevent from being sexually assaulted in the future. And I think you just alluded to something very, very powerful and important that I think other victims and survivors should know about too. And that is that the rape can continue,
Yeah.
and it obviously did for you. Was there any time when you felt like this was consensual, or was it always a surprise? Was it always non-consensual in your mind?
I think that there were times when it was consensual, but it was performative. It was because I would, like I said, I was 14, 15. I think if I remember correctly, I turned 16 right after we finally broke up. And I was too young to have fun having sex.
Yeah,
I didn't know what I was doing.
right.
But there would be things he was into and these weird little things that he would like, and I would do it. And I think on I think it was consensual, but it was definitely not something I was doing for me. It was something I was doing because I desperately had to keep him because I thought that I had to get married.
I guess in my mind, as an investigator and somebody who's been studying sex assault dynamics for as long as I have, I would call that non-consensual um,
Maybe not
sexual
from
contact.
a legal standpoint, I guess. I don't know.
I'm not even sure about that,
Yeah.
and I think it's something important that law enforcement investigators should know is that really what that is manipulative
Hmm.
and coercive. And if it's not consensual to the sense that, yes, this is something I really want, then yeah, it's sexual assault. And it's for one reason or another. And you've just mentioned those reasons of, I felt like I had to, that feeling of, in order to hang on to him because now I have to marry him. That's a manipulative aspect on what he's doing, what he knows about you, and how he's able to control you. And those are all power and control tactics. Everything that you mentioned. In fact, I'm not knowing a whole lot of detail about what you're talking about, but even being afraid to leave the house or doing things with your family and things along those lines are very strong power and control dynamics of what we call domestic violence or interpersonal relationship violence. And that's exactly what that is. And so I think it's important to let our listeners know that, if you're not consenting to the aspect of what you're saying, sex should be enjoyable. Sex should be a part of your life that is something you want to do. And if it's not, and you're being manipulated, coerced, forced into it, it's absolutely sex assault. So I think it's important that we talk about that, but also important for you to know that in going forward from here, I don't think any of what you're talking about was consensual. And I think our listeners should know that. What was that?
So this is very therapeutic.
And that's what education should be. I'm not a therapist, and I don't claim to be. I'll just make that caveat and announcement right here for the listeners. I'm not a therapist. I don't have a degree. I do have a degree in psychology, but I don't have any certification to be a therapist. But a lot of what I talk about, I've been told over and over, is very cathartic and helpful for people to know. And that's part of why I think it's important to do this podcast, is to let our listeners know what they're feeling is normal and what they're going through is common for someone who's been sexually assaulted.
That's always what I really, that was my main goal behind any of the outreach and things that I ever did. But it also really helped me for the same reasons, that when I would talk about it, I would get comments and messages and responses of, oh my gosh, this is what happened to me. This is how I, and it really did create a community of me and these people, most of which I'd never met. I met some of them, but a lot of my followers, I never met them. But it did sort of create a little community of people who understand each other. And that was very therapeutic for me. And to be able to tell my story and have people believe me and healed my inner child a little bit. I wish I could go back and tell 15-year-old me, like, someone's going to believe you.
That's so awesome, Court. I'm really happy that you have made those comments, but also that it just makes me feel even more secure and happy about the fact that you've agreed to be here today and talk about these things, because this is critical stuff and super important for victims to hear. And you even closed out your video clear back, I think you said that was like 2016 or so, with
it would have been
2019 with the comments of, I'm doing this because I want people to have a voice, that we should know about what's going on, and we should talk about it, and we should be more aware. And especially with the Me Too movement being as strong as it is, and so many people finally talking about what their experience was like. But now what do we do with it? This platform is for that. So tell us a little bit, if you could, about finally telling someone and what the fallout was from that in terms of what happened moving forward.
So for that one, because like I said before, I have two experiences, two different boyfriends, different times in my life. And I think both of them, the fallout part is, it can almost be worse than the assault itself sometimes, at least as far as the life changes that were made. So with the first one, I was going into my freshman year. And like I said, I was at summer camp with my youth pastor's wife. I was very close with her at the time. And I don't remember how the conversation got started, but at some point she asked me, like I was also very depressed. I was going through a lot of mental health issues, had been for a couple of years. I had self-harmed and things like that. And so we're talking about that. And she's basically just asking, like, why don't you just stop, pretty much. And it's when I finally told her. And like I said, I don't think it was until I told her that I fully understood. Like, I think I knew I had, at that point, I knew I had been raped and I knew I was in a bad situation, but I don't think I really understood what I was going through yet. I was still sort of seeing it through rose-colored glasses, I guess.
Yeah.
I was still in this, like, manipulated fog.
Sure.
Brainwashed. And but I remember telling her what happened and how shocked she was and like horrified that she was by everything. And that's when I was like, you're right, that sucks. We should do something about that. And she's like, well, we have to tell your parents. And I was like, that sounds like a you problem. I'm not doing that. And she was like, well, what if you wrote them a letter and I give it to them and I tell them everything you just told me and you don't have to be there and we can talk to you afterwards. And I was like, all right, fine. She was also my next door neighbor. And so after church camp, a couple of days later, I wrote this letter. It was 1 page. I don't know how I crammed all this stuff into 1 page, but I did. And I gave it to her and she was like, this 1 page, this isn't enough. And I was like, no, I did it in 1 paragraph. It's good. Go. I don't want to do anymore. And I remember my bedroom overlooked our backyard and we had like a fire pit out there and they lived in the house behind us. So she would hop the fence and we would have fire and stuff all the time. So I remember I looked out my bedroom window and she's sitting around the fire with my parents, which was not an odd sight. They did that all the time. But I just knew this was the one. Like I could just tell by the way that my dad kind of had his head in his hands. And I was like, crap. All right, let's get ready for this. And first I was just terrified that I was going to be in trouble. Like I said, my dad's a Southern Baptist pastor, very religious. Sex before marriage is a big no-no. And I was just terrified that I was going to get in trouble, or like I said, they're going to make me get married, or I didn't know what was going to happen. And I don't fully remember. I remember going outside. I remember talking to them a little bit. I remember them coming to my room and talking. I don't really remember much of what we talked about or anything. I might've been dissociating a little bit then too. I was very nervous. They took it as well as parents could, and they were not mean about it. All the fears and things that I had, none of that happened. So that was good. I got pulled out of school. I don't think I got pulled out immediately. I remember there was some other incidents that happened involving him. He, like I said, he lived down the road from me. So he would come to my house all the time and he would try to break in, or he would throw rocks in my window. And it was very, very dramatic breakup that we had. And let's see, I was trying to remember exactly the timeline, but it's hard to. But I remember there was the final break was he came over to my house one day. My parents weren't home. They weren't home from work yet. And somehow he convinced me to come back over to his house. He was trying to get me back. And I might get this timeline all mixed up because it was a lot of going on, but I'm going to try my best to get all the details right. But I remember he got me to go back over to his house, went over there. We get into a huge fight. He pulled a knife out. He stabbed me in the arm, and not bad. It was just a little slit, but I still got stabbed. That sucked. He did try to, because at this point I had come out about the rape and he was not happy. And he's, saying, I never did that. You wanted it, blah, blah, blah. And however, when I brought it up, he knew the exact instances that I was talking about, which makes me think he did know what he was doing. Otherwise, he wouldn't remember these specific times, but he did.
Yeah.
And last thing I remember was I got away from, he had locked me in his house. I got away from him, run out of the house. I'm running down the street, crying, bleeding. A car had seen me run out. And I remember this car stopping and being like, hey, do you need help? What's going on? And I just kept running. I think I said, like, he's trying to get me or something. And I kept running. Those people had called the police. And I jumped fences to get back to my house because I wasn't even going to risk trying to run around the block. I jumped all my neighbors' fences, ran into my house. I remember I fell into the back door and my parents had just gotten home. So they were standing right there. And my dad didn't even say anything. He saw the distress I was in. He saw the way that I ran into the door. He grabbed his keys and he walked out. And at first I was upset because I was like, hey, man, comfort me. But then I realized that he walked out and he drove straight over there, talked to the police, went to the police station and pressed charges. So that was cool. A lot of people don't get to have charges pressed. And I don't think that's something I would have known to do on my own. So that was the time that my dad, I think, handled the best that he could. Got a restraining order, all that fun stuff. I remember another time, I think right after that he showed up at my house again, and it was like in the middle of the night. And this is one very fond memory I have of my dad, his superhero moment. I think he was banging on the door trying to get me to come out or something. And my dad runs outside. As soon as he sees my dad, he starts to run away, which is hilarious because my dad's like kind of short and like not intimidating looking. But he was pretty intimidating in this moment. My dad runs out into the yard and is chasing him around the yard, and he grabs him by the back of his shirt and he throws him to the ground and he's screaming, "You raped my daughter." And I think stopped himself just in time to realize that he can't beat up a minor, but he ran off scared. That was kind of awesome. A lot of people don't get to see their rapists get beat up by their dad. So that was cool. Yeah, I got pulled out of school. After that point, I ended up dropping out of high school because I was just too depressed, too traumatized, couldn't focus on work and stuff. And after a year or two, I was so behind that I ended up just getting my GED. I didn't see him. I've seen him sort of in passing a couple of times. I don't think I saw him again for years after that. He still lived at the house right down the street from me for many years. I don't really remember. I remember sometimes he'd drive by, and you can't get into my neighborhood without driving by the house. So I have, anytime even to this day that I go to my parents' house, I have to drive by that house. I'm pretty sure his mom still lives there. I don't know. And yeah, that's pretty much that. I think one of the worst parts about that whole scenario was getting pulled out of school. I also wasn't allowed to talk to any of my old friends or anything from my old school, at risk, because we had a lot of mutual friends. So at risk of him trying to come and find me or trying to talk to me through other people or something, I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. And while I was gone, everybody, I wasn't there to defend myself. So of course he had his side of the story. I'm crazy and I'm a liar and I left because I'm a big slut and got pregnant or something. All these rumors start going around and I wasn't there to defend myself. And that sucked. I wasn't allowed to on social media or anything. Yeah, I would say that was about that. I don't think I have many memories other than just being really depressed after that.
Cord, I want to just express to you how sorry I am for the experiences that you've been through. I really am sorry that you had to experience what you experienced. It should have never happened. But I also want to thank you for being so brave in telling this story. It's amazing that you have the strength. Say that again. I'm sorry. I walked on you, and with Zoom, it kind of cuts one of the other mic off.
I said I really appreciate you having me on here. Like I said, it's something that I used to talk about all the time. I've gotten very comfortable talking about it. There's some things that are hard just because I feel like it's really awkward, but for the most part, I don't feel it's, for me, it's therapeutic to talk about, especially in cases like this. I actually feel much more talking like this in a way that I think might help people than I do talking to my therapist or something.
That's interesting. I know it sounded kind of like I was trying to wrap up, and I'm not. I just wanted to take a quick break there and tell you how sorry I am for what happened. It really brings out my emphatic side tremendously for victims. In fact, I've been telling people for almost 40 years now, my whole goal in getting into law enforcement, and especially once I got into family crimes and rape investigation, was the purpose behind everything I did was to try and bring justice to victims. And so this to me is an amazing opportunity for others to kind of learn and grow from your experience too. Can we talk a little bit about, if you're able to tell me, do you, looking back, attribute that self-harm and that depression directly to the rape?
No, I've dealt with anxiety since I was very little. I remember when I was like 8 years old, going to the hospital all the time because they thought that I had breathing problems, and it wasn't until I older we realized that I was hyperventilating because I had panic attacks.
I see.
And I'd say around middle school, shortly before meeting him, is when I think I started to really deal with mental health issues that definitely exacerbated it.
That was my next question.
Yeah, it did not cause it. I also have since been diagnosed with bipolar and fibromyalgia, which can cause a lot of depression and stuff.
Sure.
And I do think it prevented me from getting more help. A lot of like, my parents, a lot of adults in my life, they saw it as teen angst. And they saw my relationship with him. They didn't realize how bad it was. They saw it as just me being rebellious and dating the bad boy or something. And it wasn't until everything came out that they realized why I was acting the way that I did. And it happened again. Like I said, there were 2 times. We haven't touched on the second one yet. You mentioned earlier how the myth is that if it happens once, you know what to do. And I always thought that I did, because that happened when I was a teenager. And I always thought, oh my God, it happened because I was so young, but now I know what to do. But it happened again when I was 22. 22? Yeah, I was 22. And it was 2016. And I met another guy, and it was very similar situation, only 10 times worse, where we met, things seemed so great. He did the love bombing thing, roped me in. And but that was, I think, worse. 1, because the abuse was worse, and 2, because now I'm an adult. And so at least when I was a kid, people didn't really hold me responsible for my actions. But as an adult, everyone just said, oh, she should know better. Why are you doing this? Why? Because I was just, he was always at bars. He was a really bad alcoholic. He had a really bad drug problem. I don't do drugs. I have a drink occasionally, but I'm not one to be at a bar every single day. But when I was with him, I had to be with him at all times. He would freak out if I was anywhere else. So I was at the bar all the time. And I would usually get 1 drink and then just pour the rest into his, hoping that he would get really drunk and pass out. Then I could go home. Sometimes it worked. But yeah, I remember like my family hated him. He was terrible. And he would also show up at the house being all crazy all the time. And again, they saw it as just me being rebellious, or me, I don't know. I'm pretty sure they thought I had a drug problem or something, because he did, but I truly didn't. And yeah, I think a lot of trauma, PTSD, depression was heavily exacerbated by that. I also was very malnourished. He starved me a lot. I got down to about 80 pounds. And everybody saw, that's kind of one of the crazy things, is that like everybody saw this, but yet after we broke up and I came out with my story, everybody was shocked. I'm like, how did you not know?
So are you able to tell us a little bit then about the second sexual assault?
Yeah. So this one started out a little bit differently. Like I said, I was an adult. I was no longer religious, and I was a bit more comfortable with my sexuality. I'd met him on a dating app. We were hanging out, eventually continued hanging out, started dating. But at the same time, it was, very quickly, I realized like it started to get abusive. It started out with little things, little lies, little manipulative things that don't seem like a big deal in and of themselves, but eventually they pile up. And eventually it got to the point where he was very physically abusive, very sexually abusive all the time. That one also, when talking about the sexual abuse, it wasn't, there's not really one moment that I can pin down like there is with the first one. because at first, like I said, we were dating. At first it was all consensual. Everything was fine. But then once it started to get more abusive and more manipulative, there would be times that I didn't want to. And it started out with coercion, and then it moved on to aggressive, but made it seem sexy, made it seem like we're playing a game or something. And then that eventually moved on to actual physical abuse. And it was such a slow burn that and this is, I think, what I talked about in the video that you saw. It's been so long since I've watched that video. I honestly don't really remember what I said in it. But I do remember the instance that I was talking about in that one. And I remember there was this one day, several months into us dating, things had been really bad. I mean, I had dropped a lot of weight. I was extremely depressed. I was completely cut off from my entire family and friends. And I remember we were having sex, but I was turned around facing away from him. And I remember this moment where I just realized that I wasn't moving. I wasn't doing anything. I was just kind of sitting there, and he was doing everything. And I wasn't even faking it. I wasn't making any sounds. I had a straight face, and I was just chilling there, just waiting for it to be over. I think I might've been dissociating a little bit. And I remember like snapping this moment and being like, what am I doing? Like, I don't want to do this. Why? And he obviously doesn't care, because he can tell I'm not into it. You know, when someone's enjoying having sex with you, I'm just sitting here. So, and for him, I don't even think that it was one of those things. I mean, I'm not a therapist, I don't know, but at least from my experience and how I felt in this situation, I don't even think it was one of those things that was necessarily about power or sex or anything. I think it was just that he didn't see me as a person. I know that because he told me that all the time. I wasn't a person to him. I was just a toy, something to play with. And I think that was the moment when I started to realize that. And I'm just realizing, like, man, if he saw me as a person, he would want me to participate. But I'm not. I'm just sitting here. I'm just staring into space. He doesn't even notice. He doesn't care. And that's when I started kind of thinking back to the past experiences with him. And then, like I said, it progressively got worse and worse from there. I remember one of the worst things actually put me in the hospital, and I still have some issues to this day because he gave me a lot of infections, no STDs, which is great, but he would go back and forth anally and vaginally without my consent. He would just pick and choose what he was feeling in the moment, and sometimes he would go back and forth, which is not healthy. Lots of bacteria. And also we were homeless for a little while. He had gotten kicked out of his house, and he wouldn't let me go home. So I wasn't able to keep up with my hygiene and stuff for a while. I remember I was on my period once while we were homeless, and I didn't have any tampons or anything. So I'm just bleeding all over myself. And he did that and went back and forth, and it caused a really bad kidney infection, put me in the hospital. And I would get, infections and UTIs and stuff like that all the time, just from, I don't know, transference. I guess I'm not a doctor. I don't really know how it happens, and it caused a lot of issues. Like, I still have like digestive issues and stuff because of it.
Again, I'm so sorry you endured that experience. And I don't know, I think it's so critically important and commendable that you're talking about this. I know there are listeners to this podcast who are going to say, that's what's happening to me. Now what? And will relate to what you're saying. And I think that's why it's so important. I am so thankful that you're willing to talk about it as openly as you are. It cannot be easy, even today. And I know it's bringing up all kinds of memories that aren't pleasant, aren't easy, that are traumatic, that I'm sure you're still living with, as you said, not only physically, but emotionally.
Yeah.
So
trauma, it comes in waves. Like, there are times, I don't know. I guess sometimes it just depends on my mental health. If I'm having a good week, sometimes I mean, I think about it every day, but I don't dwell on it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other times when something completely random that hasn't triggered me in years will all of a sudden trigger me again. And luckily, a big help has been my husband. He's really, really good at recognizing those triggers and knowing what to do. He's had to help me through plenty of panic attacks, and he lets me talk about it whenever I need to, which is great because a lot of people don't want to hear about it. I remember I've dated people since then, or just friends or whoever, that I'll try to talk about it, and they're like, okay, that I don't want to hear that. Like that's scary. I don't like it. And I'm like, oh yeah, must suck for you having to hear about it. But so sorry.
No, let's don't worry about me. Let's just think about how it feels to you.
But at the same time, no one's responsible for my trauma, so no one has to listen to me, but it's very nice that he does and makes me feel very comfortable. And
I'm so glad you have him, because that is probably one of the most important aspects of trauma recovery, is having someone that you can talk to and tell these kinds of things to that will help you through it. I think the added bonus from my perspective is that not only is he there for you, and yes, that's therapeutic, and he listens to you and he helps you through these anxiety attacks and panic attacks, but on top of all that, he loves you. And I think that's just awesome that you have someone like that to be there for you emotionally, but also at a much deeper intimacy level of someone who cares what this is doing to you and is there for you. But I think
it's funny that after you've had so many, because I mean, not all my relationships were abusive. I've dated some lovely people, just didn't work out. But still, after having all of that trauma and stuff, it gets so normalized. You just kind of, either you don't think anything of it because it's so normalized, or you just expect the abuse to come. And there have been so many times, this actually happened just last night, that me and my husband had gotten into an argument about a week or so ago. Nothing major. But we hadn't really talked it out. And last night, we were in the car and I brought it up and I was like, hey, we haven't really talked about this yet. And I've been so scared to bring this up because I was like, oh my God, he's going to yell at me. He's going to be so angry. And I brought it up and he was like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that was still bothering you. Yeah, what's up? And I told him and he was like, oh yeah, okay. I didn't realize that. Thanks for pointing it out. I'm sorry. And we talked about it. It took 5 minutes. And I was like, is that it? He's like, why? And I was like, I thought you were going to get like really mad. And he's like, why? Did you do something bad? And I was like, no. And this is what we always say to each other whenever I'm kind of shocked like this. And I'm like, I was so scared you were going to be mad at me. He'll go, did you do something bad? No. Did you hurt me? No. Okay. Well, then put your sorries in a bucket and let's move away. Okay.
Yeah. That's so cool. That's great. I think there's a whole lot more that we could go into, and I'm kind of hoping that we can use our relationship and our mutual desire to promote each other's causes to have some more conversations in the future about this stuff. Tell me, well, I want to go back to that very first one. And I'll just use the language I'm used to using because this is how I view the person that you were talking about. Was the perpetrator prosecuted?
Kind of. So we never, you don't always get to charge them with everything they did. You have to charge with what you have evidence of. And so we weren't able to charge him with any type of like rape or anything like that. It was, I think, if I remember correctly, it was like inciting a panic, something like that. And then I can't remember what the like legal term, but it was something about like causing trauma to someone. I don't remember what the exact charges were. But neither of them were super severe. It went to court, but I never had to see him because we were both minors. It wasn't like a jury trial or anything. It was just like a court thing. I didn't understand any of the legal mumbo jumbo. I probably wouldn't. I was able to look over that stuff. So I don't completely know what happened to him. I know that I had a restraining order that lasted at least a couple of years. I'm pretty sure it expired. It was never an issue, so I never looked into it. I've moved away since, so. And then he got, I know that he got some kind of community service and something on his record that would stay until he was like 21. I don't remember exactly what it was. He was never on any type of sex offender list or anything like that.
Okay.
The charge we were able to get him with was something pretty small. It was like a small county ordinance or something like that.
Yeah. What about the second sex assault? Did that ever result in a report being made or anything come of that?
Well, there were a few different instances where the police were called. I never called them. I was always too scared, but I would say I encouraged other people to call for me, but it never worked out in my favor. The first time was he was drunk and he was driving my car. I did not want him to be driving my car. And so I'm trying to get him, we're fighting because I said, don't drive my car. And he got pissed about that. And he was absolutely just inebriated, obliterated. And finally he pulls over into a cul-de-sac on like a kind of suburban type of area outside the city a little bit. And we're just fighting, screaming. Again, I don't really remember the exact timeline of these events, but I remember at one point we were outside of the car. I remember he was grabbing me by my neck, throwing me to the ground. It was fall. There was like leaves all in my hair and stuff. He ripped my dress off of me, which I did not realize in the commotion until a little bit later. At some point we ended up back in the car. I think I got back in the car and I was trying to drive it away, but he jumped in after me. I couldn't get away fast enough because I remember at this point I was in the driver's seat, or I was at least leaning over the driver's seat, and he was very, very clearly trying to kill me. He was strangling me. He was choking me. He was pushing my face down into the seat. He kept telling me over and over, if I wanted to kill you, I would. I want to kill you. And I couldn't get away from him. I was banging on the horn in like the driver's seat, just hoping that somebody would hear it and help me. And I guess he saw police lights. I didn't see them until a minute later, but I think he saw them because he let go of me. As soon as he let go, I ran off. And like I said, I look a mess. My dress was ripped like clean off me. It was like straps, and the straps were ripped clean off me. I didn't notice it yet. I had leaves in my hair. My back is completely scratched up. I'm covered in bruises. I have marks all over my neck. Very clear what's going on. I remember hearing there was a woman parked at the end of the cul-de-sac, or she was standing in the driveway at the end of the cul-de-sac next to where we were parked. And I think that's who called the police, because I saw her standing outside and she saw me run away and she yells, "Are you okay? Come here." But I was just so scared. I just kept running. And I get to the end of the street and I see the police cars turn in. And I was like, oh, thank God, like someone's here to help me. And I think I tripped, but when I tripped, I just let myself fall to the ground. And I just sat there and I just waited for the police to come over. They were all male cops except for one female cop, which I feel is important to the story. And she walks over and I'm just sitting on the ground like this. I'm crying, I'm freaking out, hyperventilating. I can barely talk. I'm just panicking so hard. They assumed that I'm drunk. And truly wasn't. Hadn't had a drink all day. I was actually picking him up from the bar. And but they assume I'm drunk. So right away, they're not taking me seriously. The only woman walks over to me and she ties my dress back together and she says, "You don't want these boys seeing you like that." As if I just ripped the dress off for fun.
Yeah.
And so they come over, they're asking me what's happening. I'm trying to tell them what's happening, but I'm freaking out. I'm crying. I just can't get it out. And they're not being very kind. They're just telling me over and over, like, okay, well, why are you here? Why is this? Like, come on. Like, and it's pretty clear they think I'm drunk. They wouldn't let me drive home because they said I've been drinking. And I was like, I have, like, breathalyze me. Make me walk in a row. Like, I have not been drinking. Can I just go home? And they refused to give me any tests, which I've since been told is because of the paperwork. I don't know. Maybe. But they refused to give me any tests or anything. Then I remember seeing him walk towards where the cop cars are, which was over by me at the end of the street, walking over with the two cops. And they talked to him for a minute, and they came over and talked to me, and they were like, he says that you're lying and that he was asleep in the back seat the whole time. So that's why he had let go of me, was because he climbed in the back seat and pretended to be asleep. And then when they came over, they were like, what? She's just crazy. She must be drunk. I was asleep. And they believed him.
Yeah.
Like, they saw me in my state, and they were like, well, he said he was sleeping. Nothing we can do about it. And I'm like, this lady called the police. Like, what?
Yeah.
They gave him a ride home. They made me go to the police station and sit and wait. I didn't get arrested or anything. They just made me like sit in like a little waiting area at the police station and call my mom for a ride. It was like 4:00 in the morning by this point. My mom was super upset, so angry that she had to pick me up from jail. And I was like, I'm not in jail. I'm just out of jail, not in the jail. And she didn't care. She was furious that she was just convinced I was in jail. And I was like, well, it would be a lot more complicated for me to leave if I was in jail. I'm not in jail, just sitting here. And she was just angry that she had to pick me up. She had to get out of bed and pick me up at 4 a.m. And I'm just crying. And like I said, this was at the time when my parents and a lot of people just thought that I was like just party girl or something. So she didn't understand that I didn't want to be there. I was not having fun. She thought that I was just out drinking or something. And I'm trying to tell her that's not the case. And nobody believed me. And then I remember we got home, and for some reason I couldn't sleep in my room that night. I don't remember why. Maybe we were like painting or something. I don't remember. For whatever reason, I was sleeping on the couch. She walks into the living room with me, and I was wearing a cardigan. I took my cardigan off, and she saw how scratched up my back was, and she saw that my dress was tied onto me. And so casually she goes, oh, what happened to your back? And I just looked at her like, I don't know how to tell you what happens to my back. I don't know how you don't know. I don't know how anybody doesn't know. And the way that I remember, just the way she said it so casually, like as if I just had a little boo-boo, and,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until, let's see, he and I would have broken up. That was in the summertime. He and I would have broken up. We broke up right around Christmas. And nobody, it was all just very silent. Nobody talked about it. I tried to talk about it. I didn't have a good relationship with my family. 1, because he had isolated me, and 2, just because, again, they thought that I was just out partying and doing drugs and stuff. Nobody believed me. There was no number of bruises I could come home with for whatever reason that would make them believe me. And there was another time just before we broke up that the cops got called again. And this one was also absolutely ridiculous. And this one was at my house. He would show up at my house a lot. He didn't drive. He didn't have a car or a driver's license, but he would steal cars and drive to my house. And I lived at my parents' house, like an hour away from where he lived. So how he ended up at my house all the time, I have no idea, but somehow he ended up there all the time. And he was always trying to break in. And a lot of times I would let him in because I had 2 little sisters and I was scared of what he would do. And so this one particular night he comes in, he's acting all crazy. I end up getting him out of the house. Someone called the police because they said that there was some crazy guy walking down the street, because I guess he was probably on drugs or something. I don't know. I went back to bed. A little bit later, police show up, knocking on my door, and they were like, hey, we picked up this guy. He said that he was here. And I was like, yeah, can you do something about that? And they were like, well, we had to run background because there's a situation, and it's just routine that we run your license or something. And I was like, okay, I guess, whatever. And turns out I had a warrant for my arrest because of a parking ticket that I did not pay 2 years prior.
Wow.
And apparently there was a court date, and I did not know about it because it was a parking ticket. And I missed that court date, so I had a warrant. So I ended up getting arrested. And I could tell the officer that was there, he felt so bad, and he was like, I'm so sorry. Like, I have to do this. Hopefully we can just take you down and get this sorted out real quick, because this seems ridiculous. Like, I'm really sorry. And I was like, I don't even understand what's going on. So I ended up going to jail for like a night, got out the next day, went to court, paid $30. So that was ridiculous. Went to jail over a $30 fine. And I was like, I could have just given you $30, whatever.
But again, they gave him a ride home. And I'm like, look, I'll pay the $30 fine, whatever. But why do you guys keep giving him rides home? Like, how many times do I have to call the police? And I think one of the worst things that, other than things he said to me, the worst thing that anyone said to me in that entire time period was that woman tying my dress back on me, saying, these boys don't want to see, you don't want these boys seeing you like this. And for it to come from the only woman in the group, like the one person who should know how to talk to me, or who should be able to see those signs, didn't you go through some kind of training for this?
Which is exactly why I do what I do.
Yeah.
I am trying to get the training out there that law enforcement needs for dealing with domestic violence and sex assault cases in a much more informed way. I can tell you from my own experience as a cop and going through the police academy then and the criminal investigative division with the Army and going through that academy, the way law enforcement is trained doesn't nearly enough touch on the trauma-informed aspects of victim impact. I can tell you just from the human neurological impact of maliciousness and the harm that people see, the immediate response is to not recognize it, not absorb it, not take it in, because that hurts. It hurts even law enforcement to bring that in. I'm not making excuses. In fact, a lot of times the pushback I get is because I'm somewhat, I don't know if the word is critical, although it probably is appropriate, of the way law enforcement responds to these types of cases, because obviously listening to your story, what occurred is not right. It goes beyond wrong. It's almost complicit in the aspect that since nothing was done, it condones some really, really bad behavior.
And it definitely made him think that he was above the law. After that happened, it was all downhill from there. That was the first time he had ever seriously, like, physically abused me. He had put his hands on me a couple of times, but it would be like grabbing my wrist, nothing that left serious damage or anything. Still wrong, but that was the first time that he had ever, like, really, really abused me and, like, really marked me up. And after that, he was cool with it. He felt like he was above the law. And I remember he also, that was a big reason why I didn't tell anybody too, because I thought there was no point. Because I remember I think he ended up having a court date for like a DUI from like years ago, something about something from years ago. He ended up having to go to court to get it sorted out. I don't remember what it was. And he went to one court date and he was supposed to have like a probation officer or something. I don't remember the details. He never went. And anytime I'd ask him about it, he'd be like, oh yeah, they moved it. They rescheduled it, something. And the first one or two times I was like, okay, that happens. But after a while I was like, okay, you just skipped it. You skipped all these court dates. Like, I know you did. Mm. And later on, we found out that he had a new active warrant. And I was like, so I was right. You skipped it. But clearly, even if I did ever want to press charges or something, he's not going to show up, Like, and no one believed me, so it's not like they were going to go arrest him. I just didn't feel like I had anybody that I could tell. And even when I did finally come out about it, like I said, it was about 2 years later. It would have been 2018. And I don't know what compelled me to come out with this. I had talked vaguely about like abuse and assault in a very broad context on a lot of my platforms at this point, but I'd never told a specific story about me. And one day I was just really depressed, feeling a lot of PTSD, and I just started writing in my notes on my phone, just kind of writing out a little, I don't know, diary entry, I guess, just getting out some feelings. And I realized I really like doing that. It made me feel a lot better. I calmed down a lot from that. And I was like, screw it, I'm just going to post this. And I don't care what happens. And it had details. It has his name, pictures of him. Like, it was a very much outing him specifically post. Any other time I've talked, I'm always very private about it. I just don't want to deal with the backlash. But in this case, I was like, I can't let anybody else go through this. And I know that I was just a notch on his bedpost. So there were more during me, so most certainly are more after me. But yeah, I remember I posted that and I didn't say anything about it. I didn't tell anybody. And then I woke up the next morning and it had just hundreds of shares and comments, and all these people around Cincinnati are posting, look out for this guy, don't date this guy. It ended up on like these don't date Cincinnati pages and stuff like that. last I heard, he had gotten kicked out of his favorite bar. And then a handful of people who knew me back then reached out and they were like, oh my God, it all makes sense now. One person did just say that he was just going through some stuff. I was like, yeah, whatever. But even my sister is my best friend, and my other two best friends, when they saw it, they were like, oh my God, we had no idea. And I'm like, I don't know how. They're like, I just thought he was mean. I'm like, well, he was. Some other things too. But yeah, I don't know. I felt like I think deep down I felt like if someone cared, they would know. They would figure it out. They would see the bruises. They would see how I'm acting. They would see how depressed I am. They would see that, like I said, I weighed like less than 80 pounds. I was very sickly looking. And I guess I just thought, like, well, if there's someone who can do anything about it, if someone's going to help me, then they're going to help me. I'm not going to go around asking everybody, because I could ask 100 people and none of them seem to believe me. So I'm just going to wait for someone to notice, and nobody ever did.
Court, what's your message to law enforcement?
Have empathy. I can see how when you work in law enforcement for a while, you could be a little jaded, a little bit, I don't know, things get normalized to you, I guess. And I guess some people even go on a power trip, and I can see how that happens. But I think that the only way to avoid things like that is empathy, that you don't know the situation. Even if someone's in trouble, you're there to protect, not be the judge. And I mean, I think talking about the night in the cul-de-sac, I think all the time about what would have happened had I run to that woman instead of running down the street. Maybe if someone was there who could have vouched for me. I don't know if they ever spoke to her. They might have it. I don't know. But I mean, they obviously weren't going to believe me. Maybe they would have believed someone else. And I just think all the time about how differently things could have gone. My whole life could have gone had any single person there just said, wait, she doesn't seem drunk. Maybe she's not awful. Maybe she's just going through something. I mean, I guess that's something that anyone in my life, or I think a lot of victims go through that most, I guess. People just either they don't believe you, or you just are afraid they won't believe you, but either way. And I understand you can't just jump to believe everybody, but you still have to keep an open mind, and you still have to be empathetic. You can be empathetic without just jumping to believe everything everyone says. Be kind.
I'm going to throw a plug in here for the organization called End Violence Against Women International, and my friend Joanne Archambault, who through that program started a campaign that is called Start by Believing.
Yeah.
And it's specifically geared for law enforcement. And I think if more law enforcement, patrol officers, investigators, and administration took that to heart, we'd see a whole lot different response from the top down. And that's what is needed, is we need to start listening to and believing our victims of sex assault and interpersonal violence. It's critical. And I think your story is so important. It's amazing to hear what you have to say. So I love the message. Empathy is one of the main things that I teach, is an empathic approach. It's the very start of a trauma-informed investigation, is empathy and starting by believing. I don't want to drag this out too long, because I know it's a really difficult topic to talk about. And you mentioned earlier that you are in therapy.
Not right now. My therapist dumped me, and so I need to go find.
But you have been. Can you talk? I'm sorry, I walked on you.
Oh, I said I'm kidding. She moved to a new office, and I'm moving to Chicago in 2 months. So I figured no sense in starting a new therapist. I'm just gonna have to find a new one. So I'm gonna do that in February.
Tell us your thoughts on therapy.
I have two conflicting thoughts, but I stand by both of them. I'm a big believer that everybody should go to some form of therapy at some point, even if you don't have trauma or mental health or something. I just think it's really good to have a non-biased person help you learn about yourself. I think everybody can benefit from therapy at some point. I also, however, think that you have to be ready for it. For a long time, I wasn't ready for it. I have some trauma regarding therapy as well. When I was younger, I told my parents about what happened when I was a teenager, and they put me in. I don't think it was actually a therapist. I'm pretty sure it was just like some counselor lady at a church or something. But she was not very nice. She pretty much told me that everything was my fault because I didn't read my Bible enough, and that I need to respect my parents and things like that. It was pretty awful. So I was very against therapy for a long time because of that experience. But then this would have been 2019. Oh, and I'd also gone to different doctors and gotten all kinds of weird misdiagnoses and drugs that weren't right for me and things like that. I'm not against drugs. I'm just against the wrong drugs. And so I was very against it for a very long time until in 2019, I finally found a doctor that took me seriously, listened to me. I had my regular doctor, my psychiatrist, and a therapist all in one building. So they were able to communicate with each other, which was great. Got me a proper diagnosis and proper medication that actually helps. And that was in Chicago. So I did end up having to move away from her. And then when I moved back to Cincinnati, it was during COVID. So that made things very difficult. I've had a couple of therapists since then, but each time they always end up moving to new offices. And after this was like my fifth one. And during our very first meeting, I was like, please don't leave me. We don't even get to touch on my abandonment issues before they abandoned me. And she's like, I'm not, I promise. And then 3 meetings later, she was like, I'm really sorry. Please.
Oh man. We're laughing, but it's not all that funny.
If we don't laugh, we'll cry.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was, yeah. So I decided I'm going to just which this brings me back to like, you got to be ready for it because my husband also sees a therapist. He lucked out. First one was a good one. And
great. Like
not everybody has that experience. Sometimes it's really hard. And but yeah, he's trying to encourage me to go to a new one. And I was like, I can't tell this story again. To another new person. And then I'm just gonna have to do it again when we move. So I was like, I need to take a break from therapy. I need therapy for my therapy. And,
sometimes that makes sense.
Yeah, I was like, look, I've been talking about my trauma. And like I said, talking to you about it in a conversation is much different than sitting in a very medical feeling room where they're talking about my mental problems and stuff. And
yeah,
I was like, I think I'm doing really good right now. I'm in a very good headspace. I'm got a very good support system. So I think that right now I'm in a very safe place to take a little break from therapy. And I'm going to start going again once we move and I find my doctor and stuff up there. So
yeah, well, good. And I hope you do find someone really, really good for you. I'm a strong believer in what is that?
It stays in one place.
Yeah. I'm a strong believer in therapy. Again, if you find the right person, and if you are with someone that you aren't comfortable with, then definitely find a therapist that you do feel comfortable with.
And I think learning that there's different types of therapy too was a big thing. I was being stuck with the same type of doctor over and over, and it just kept not working. And I'm like, well, therapy must just suck. And then, like I said, when I found that one in Chicago, they talked me through all the different types of therapy, and they're like, this, and this will work best for you. And I was like, that's perfect.
Yeah, good. So let's wrap things up with a final question.
Okay.
What message do you have for victims of sexual assault and rape, and even interpersonal violence, domestic violence, who are, number one, I'll just start with that, who are still in that situation?
First, I would say you're not alone. It's just the most isolating thing in the world. And even once you get out, you still feel so alone. I remember even after being out of it, still feeling like I was in a fog, like the world was just gray. But then I also remember one day waking up and in an almost literal, but also metaphorical sense, it's like I could see colors again.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of waking up one day and realizing like, wait, things are okay. And it wasn't all, rays of sunshine after that. There's still terrible days. There's still hard days. But there are people that believe you. There are people who are going through what you're going through. You're not alone. And you can get out. And sometimes it is hard, and sometimes it does take planning. Like my situation, it wasn't as easy as just break up with them. People make it sound that easy.
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, my situation was definitely one where it took planning, and it took an escape plan, and it took help from other people. But right. and you might have to think of some unconventional ways. I have called plenty of crisis hotlines that were huge helps. That's a big thing, I would say. A lot of people are like embarrassed to call a crisis helpline. They're wonderful.
Good.
And yeah, that there is a way out. And if that's not going to come for you today or tomorrow or next week, that's okay. It might have to go at your own pace, but there's a way out, and there are people who believe you. There are people who are there for you. There's people who support you. There's people who understand and are going through what you're going through. There's people who want to listen. And one day you will get to see colors again too.
Wow. Powerful stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there a different message then for those who've been through very similar experiences that you've been through, but are no longer in those situations, but don't know where to turn now?
First, I would say healing is not linear, and it's okay to heal at your own pace, and it's okay to have days where you don't feel like you're healing at all. I know for me, it's been, how many years has it been? 6 years now? God, I'm old. And I still, like I said, I'll have a month where I'm fine. And one day something that hasn't bothered me in a year, all of a sudden will be a major trigger. And all I can think in those times is like, oh, I was doing so good, but I'm still doing good, because there used to be times that every 10 minutes there was a trigger. Then it was every other day, and sometimes it's still every day, and that's okay, because every day it gets a little bit easier, it gets a little bit better. It's never going to be perfect. I'm never going to undo any of it. And we talked about getting justice earlier, and while I don't feel like I never got justice from like the legal system, I do feel like I got justice in my own right, in the sense that they can't control me anymore. I have an amazing life. They did not want me to be happy. They wanted me to be miserable. And after we broke up, they hoped that my life would go downhill, and I thought it would. They convinced me that I was nothing without them. So, but little by little, I was able to rebuild myself and find my worth and find new things I love that have nothing to do with them or the person that I was back then. And now I'm married and I have a beautiful home, and my hair is growing out. He made me cut it off, but it's long again. And I think just the best justice that I could ever get, maybe they could go to jail, but cool. What's that going to do for me? Maybe they get hit by a car. I don't know.
Yeah.
If they did, I would have no way of knowing. I don't Google them anymore. I used to. I don't even bother anymore. I don't think they're worth my energy. And I think that the best revenge or justice that I could ever get is having a great life and being happy and doing everything that I can to help other people who have experienced the same things.
Court, I wish that for you. I wish the best for you in all of your life. And I cannot begin to thank you enough for those words, especially for the other victims and survivors out there who may be still going through some of the same things that you went through or something similar, or who've gotten past that particular person, but still have some healing to do, because there is healing out there.
Yeah.
And you're a prime example of that. And your willingness to do what you're doing, both with me here on the SAS podcast, but also in your own right with exploring the possibility of getting back out there and telling your story and helping others, is so commendable, as I said before. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, but I can't just let you end this without me making sure that you're okay after it's been an hour and a half of talking, because this is trauma that we've been talking about. Say that again.
And I'm going to charge you for this therapy session.
Well, maybe we can cancel each other's charges out.
Yeah, no, I'm great. Thank you. Like I said, this is actually kind of therapeutic. I've been wanting to get back into this and talk about it in a way that makes me feel useful. You know,
Good.
therapy is great. Like I said, therapy is great. I highly recommend it. It has lots of benefits, but sometimes you need to talk to just a person and just have a conversation. You know, sometimes you need a little, I think both are good. And it's been a while since I got to have a conversation like this. So I really appreciate you. Thank you for having me and reaching out. And
This has been,
you found a 4-minute video that I made 3 years ago.
This has been absolutely helpful for me and beneficial in more ways than you can imagine, and on many layers and many levels. Can I ask, before you agreed to be interviewed today, or even like right before we started, did you have some sort of idea or plan on what you would do after the interview?
No, I hadn't thought about it until you said that just now.
What does the rest of your evening look like?
I just finished putting away my Halloween decorations, and I'm getting out my Christmas decorations because I don't wait until after Thanksgiving.
A lot of people don't, but that's cool. That's neat that you're looking.
Already turned on Christmas movies, and
That's awesome. I love hearing that. And obviously you have a husband that can support you, because I just don't want you to walk away from this interview and feel this huge emotional letdown and depression and concentration on the trauma, but rather concentrating on the things that are positive and good in your life. And Christmas decorations and Christmas movies are one of those things, two of those things. And then having a husband and a stepson that you can turn to and be with and just enjoy your evening. That's what I'm hoping for. And that's what I want you to kind of focus on, is the good that you have to look forward to, but also the good that you've done for the listeners of this podcast, and hopefully many others. And I want to share this recording with you, and hopefully it can get put out there in different ways in different social media platforms.
And I'm excited to see the other ones that you too, and hear everyone else's stories and the things they have to contribute. I think that's great. You know, it's funny. I actually just talking about Christmas decorations, realized that Christmas and my birthday used to be really hard times for me. Like I said, my first assault was on my birthday, and then my anniversary with the second guy was on my birthday. And I've always really loved holidays and my birthday and stuff. I love celebrating, I love decorating, and so having those kind of tarnished was really, really hard, and not being able to enjoy the holidays as much as I would want to. I love the holidays, and I didn't even realize until just now, because I was thinking, oh, I'm actually going to do great today, and I'm just going to go focus on my decorations, and just realized that doesn't bother me anymore. In a way that I didn't even notice. I enjoy holidays again, and I forgot that they used to be really hard.
That is so cool to hear. I mean, that is
really cool realization. I just had.
Well, from my perspective, for lack of better words, man, that's heartwarming and it's uplifting. And I'm really hoping that our listeners are going to feel that and take it to heart.
Yeah, I guess that's another message that I have for any survivors, that someday things won't be traumatizing anymore. I also wore a SpongeBob Halloween costume this year.
Wow.
And I didn't think about that until I was telling you the story either, that I was like, oh my God, me and my friend did Barnacle Boy and Mermaid Man.
I know. I saw those pictures online.
I literally forgot that was even an issue until, so I guess, yeah, healing, it's been a long time. It's been, how old am I? It's been 14 years. God, I'm getting up there. Yeah, it's been 14 years, but I mean, something that used to make me want to kill myself, now I can wear as a Halloween costume.
Wow. Congratulations. That is so impressive. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. I'm excited to tell my husband that. I literally didn't think about it. That's really cool. Just goes to show how much you can heal.
Really does. And thank you for sharing that and those realizations. That's awesome. Court, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you and to maybe doing another podcast in the not too distant future.
Absolutely.
All right.
Where to find me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. That does it for another episode of SAS. Thanks for listening. Listen to a new episode each week. And please remember to subscribe, rate each episode, and spread the word about this important podcast, because we all know someone who's been affected by sexual assault or rape. Remember to start by believing, and let's all do our share to help bring justice to victims of rape and sexual assault. We'll talk to you next week.